brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. That's right, Green Lantern, one of DC's most popular, powerful, and iconic superheroes with a legacy going all the way back to 1940. Yeah, that's right, we're here to celebrate the legacy and the history of Green Lantern on this latest episode of From the Vault. But we're going to start right in the middle of the pack with the most iconic and popular of all the Green Lanterns. That's going to be Hal Jordan. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, rock stars of all ages, welcome back to the Rock Show. Rikki Roxx with another episode of From the Vault Retro Action Figure Review. Last time we talked about some DC Direct. We're back on the DC Direct tip once again, and as I said, we're going to be celebrating all things Green Lantern, one of my favorite characters of all the DC canon, but we're going to be starting with not Alan Scott, not today, not Kyle Rayner, not today, but we are going to be looking at Hal Jordan, specifically based on the artwork of the iconic and ever-popular Ed McGuinness from the JLA Classified Classics line. One of the coolest looking Green Lantern figures I've ever seen. You know, I talked a little bit in the past about how DC Direct was notorious for doing figures based on specific artists and the way they drew the characters, and that's one of the coolest things about the DC Direct line. Articulation started off great, but they were overcome very quickly by more retail-based lines by the mid-2000s. But one thing that never changed is that DC Direct always had superior sculpts. So if you look at this guy right here, this version of Hal Jordan, again, based on Ed McGuinness, who had a lot of really great runs on books like Superman, Thundercats, Masters of the Universe. He's done covers for so many different comics, and his artwork has a real style to it that really pops. All the characters he draws really dynamic and powerful looking, and that's why he was one of the most celebrated artists of the early 2000s. Between 2000 and 2005 or so, he was pretty much the definitive Superman artist, and he had runs on a few other books, and the JLA Classified run was where he got to draw some of the other characters like Green Lantern and Steel and so forth. So on the back here, this was from Series 3 of the JLA Classified Classic line. And see on the back some of the other characters that are available in that line. Don't have a lot of them yet. These guys were kind of tricky to pick up, honestly. This guy, I've spent quite a while looking for Hal. He cost me a pretty penny, to be sure. Not, super expensive, but I had a few false starts getting this guy. I actually bought a version of this figure a couple years ago, and the seller backed out last minute. Refunded my money, of course, but that was a real drag because I was looking forward to getting this guy. I mean, I love Green Lantern. Green Lantern is one of my favorites of all time, going all the way back to when I was a little kid. Barely knew anything about the character, but just loved the look of it. And the ring that could do anything, all that good stuff, and the costume, very striking. This is the more modern version of Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan, for those of you who don't know, has been around DC for a very long time. First appearing in Showcase number 22 in October, I believe, of 1959. So it was pretty much the appearance of Hal Jordan and Barry Allen, the Flash, that kickstarted what we call the Silver Age of DC comic books. Those two characters coming on the scene really changed everything. And so there were a lot of Green Lanterns since then. He wasn't the first, but he's definitely the most well-known, and he's the one who had his own movie based on him and everything else like that, his own animated series. Now, everybody knows that Guy Gardner is the one true Green Lantern, but I've got something special planned for Guy Gardner. We're going to address that another day, another episode. But for right now, we're going to focus on Hal. He was Green Lantern, the main Green Lantern, in the comic books from 1959 all the way up until 1993. during the very controversial, popular, and iconic Emerald Twilight storyline, where he went a little bit nuts after his hometown, Coast City, was destroyed, as one does. And, went on a rampage, quit the Green Lantern Corps, took all the power for himself, became Parallax. I loved the story. I loved Hal's arc from idealistic hero to broken man and idealistic villain. Parallax was a great villain because he never really did evil for evil's sake. He was adamant that all he was trying to do was fix things and make a better world, even if he had to destroy the one that already existed to get there. But he thought he was in the right. Hal, he never betrayed his principles. He just sometimes took it to extremes. But the character's root always stayed the same. That's what I really liked about that story. Then, of course, 2004, Jeff Johns decides to bring him back from the dead with Green Lantern Rebirth, return him to the heroic status of the main Green Lantern, and so came back with this updated look, newer costume with more of a metallic green and less of a unitard effect, a little bit more of a uniform than a spandex bodysuit. Really cool look, and Ed McGuinness really drew him very stocky and powerful as he did all the heroes. I think most of the figures in this line actually shared a body type, which is different heads and hands, but we'll get into that a little bit. But yeah, so couldn't wait to get my hands on this figure. I collect as many Green Lantern figures as I can because they all look so great, and they tend to do each of them a little bit different and unique. This was not the first Hal Jordan that DC Direct put out, but this is one of my favorites already, just looking at it without even taking it out of the package. Again, on the back, the rest of this wave, I would definitely be picking up Zoom for sure, because look at that. That's awesome. And just for the heck of it, because it's a Superman figure, I got to get Superman Red, even though I hated that story, Superman Red and Blue. But I do have to pick them up. They are really great representations of those characters. And the Atom's pretty cool, too. He would be the one I'd be least interested to get out of this set. But eventually I am going to get all of them, because I definitely plan to get all the figures based on Ed McGuinness's artwork. He's one of my favorite artists of DC, especially that era. It's a little bit of the time, but very dynamic. I mean, his stuff just jumps right off the page at you. The fight scenes and pinups were just explosive, and I think the figures based on his art really carry that through. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back in a minute after I take him out of the package, and we're going to do the A to the Z, Baba, Hal Jordan, Green Lantern. Let's come back in a minute and do the deal. There he is, Hal Jordan, Earth's most notorious and infamous Green Lantern, as drawn by Ed McGuinness. One of the coolest Hal Jordan figures in my collection for sure, and I've got quite a few. Again, this would have been based on storylines from right around 2005, 2006, the JLA Classified line. That was a line that DC started to basically illustrate some untold tales of the Justice League that weren't recounted in the main monthly book. And yeah, Ed McGuinness sure did a number on a lot of these characters, presenting them in some of their most iconic and powerful looks. Hal Jordan in all his majesty with the green power ring. His willpower can make the impossible possible, can make anything happen, anything he can think of. Honest, fearless, and possessing the most powerful weapon in the entire DC universe. Gifted the ring by the Guardians of the Universe from the planet Oa, Hal Jordan protects Sector 2814 and the planet Earth as one of many, many, many members of the Green Lantern Corps. Now again, he is the most well-known, having appeared on many cartoons and comic books and live-action motion pictures. This right here, definitely one of the coolest action figures ever made, based on Hal Jordan. Drink it in, soak it up, dig that metallic green paint for the costume. I really love that. That is huge. Again, we've got some standard for the time articulation. Nothing groundbreaking anymore, but still pretty good for 2006 or so from DC Direct. We're going to get a little bit more deep into it in a minute, but for now, we're just going to take a good long look the one and only Hal Jordan, Earth's most popular and notorious Green Lantern. Alright, so we're going to take a little bit deeper look now at Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, JLA Classified Classic Series 3, based on the artwork of the one and only Ed McGuinness. Really like this figure. Just like everything else, nothing is perfect, but, excuse me, definitely one of the coolest Hal Jordan figures that DC Direct ever put out. Guaranteed to really pop on the shelf, stand out. A+ job on the sculpt. I mean, if you have the comics, then you know. This line of figures is one for one with the artwork in the comics, and DC Direct was great for that, whether it was Alex Ross, Ed McGuinness, Ed Benez, George Perez. When they specifically did a line based on an artist's work, they knocked it out of the park. They made it look identical every time, and that was one of my favorite things about DC Direct. I've got a lot of Hal Jordan figures because you couldn't just have one to be part of your Justice League display or collection, right? Every one that they did was completely unique in its own thing, and it made you really want to collect all of them. And this one was no different. I have quite a few Hal Jordans, and when I saw that this one existed, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. But it's pretty rare. It's pretty hard to find. This one is tough to get. Right now, 2023, you're looking at anywhere from $75 to $100 for this figure if you find it online. It just, I don't know if they didn't make a lot of them or it was just in super high demand and nobody wants to get rid of it, but either way, it took me a couple tries to finally get my hands on this figure. I paid roughly, I think, $75 for it, so ultimately I got a pretty good deal compared to what some of them go for. I've had long stretches checking eBay where this figure didn't even show up for weeks and months at a time, so I consider myself kind of lucky in that regard. It's not that you can't find it, but you're going to have to look and you're going to want to spend. But I think if you're a DC Direct collector or a Green Lantern collector at all, I think it's totally worth it, 100%. So, like always with DC Direct articulation, you get what you get. Here you have 11 points, which is actually pretty good for DC Direct. Now, again, they have, for the head only, these figures just a swivel, no ball joints, so you can't look up and down. So it's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. Again, with DC Direct, you kind of knew what you got when you picked them up. You have the shoulders, they go full 360 around, but they don't go side to side. Again, this would have been like around a 2007 or so figure, 6 or 7, so there were certain things that were not really standard in the market yet. So this is pretty standard for what you were looking at from any action figure you would buy around that time. So you don't have any bicep swivel or anything. Single jointed hinge elbows. You do get, at the glove line, you get a swivel peg for the forearm, which is pretty cool. I always like when they do that on a gloved figure because it's a good way to kind of add to the posability and hide it with the seam of the glove. So that's pretty cool. And for a character like Green Lantern, it's essential because you're going to want to do different kind of poses with them, like, you know, powering up and whatnot. So no ab crunch and waist, unfortunately. The legs go forward a bit, but not backwards at all because of the sculpt of these kind of figures. They made the butt pretty solid, so you have no backwards mobility on the legs at all. You can only go forward. It is what it is. And you have standard single hinge knees, no ankle rockers or anything. But again, for 2006, 7, whatever year this was pretty much what you would expect to get. Now, a year or two later, things exploded and a bunch of lines with a bunch more articulation were a lot more standard, and that's kind of why DC Direct started getting left behind. Mattel really swept by them with, you know, ball jointed heads and double jointed knees and elbows, and the ab crunch, and the waist swivel, and the shoulders and legs that can go sideways. But like I always say, I try to grade things of their time and place, and of its time and place, this figure would have been a fantastic one to get, and definitely I would have picked this up. If I hadn't missed it, I would have definitely been picking it up on day one. It's just when I went, it was already gone. I guess they didn't make a lot of them. Okay, sada. Now, accessory-wise, DC Direct was sometimes pretty chintzy and cheap with that. All you get is a base, which does come in handy. It's got the JLA Classified logo on it. One thing that annoys me a lot with most of these bases is the placement of the peg and how it's just never centered right with a lot of these. It's because of where they put the foot peg. Like if it was out a little more to the side, right, he could stand right in the center of the base. As it is, I've talked about this with a lot of action figure lines. They put the foot peg in a spot where the figure doesn't stand centered on the base, and it just drives me crazy. But it's fine. The main purpose is to help the figure stand up, and it definitely does that. The articulation, limited as though it is pretty good. DC Direct is always a mixed bag, as I've talked about, with their joints. Some of them are very brittle, and some of them are very strong. I have a few of these Ed McGuinness DC Direct figures, and I'll say this, they never feel brittle. The knee and elbow joints in particular have almost like a ratchety kind of feel. They don't feel loose at all. If anything, they feel like chunky and stiff. Like you have a couple different places where it sort of like locks along the path, like a ratchet, right? So there you see there's like at least two different places where you could pose the elbow joint. The knee joint is kind of the same thing. You have multiple spots where it like locks in place. That's really cool. They have some really tight joints on a lot of these DC Direct figures that came out later on. The early ones are where you usually see a lot of trouble. Like a lot of the early ones, like the original Hal Jordan figure they made was a great looking figure, and it totally looked like him in the late 80s, early 90s, but those figures had a tendency to disintegrate. I bought one, and my original DC Direct Hal Jordan has long since crumbled. The elbows and knees completely turned to literal dust, taking it out of a box after it had been in storage for a couple of years. It melted. So definitely they got better as time went on. This figure is a lot more sturdy than most of the other ones. That's a great thing about the Ed McGuinness-based DC Direct figures. They don't feel brittle like a lot of them do. They tend to be, if anything, a little stiff, but that helps the posability. You have very limited posability, but your figure will hold a pose and hold a stance without a lot of problems. So, DC Direct figures have been jokingly called posable statues by many people in the past based on the limited articulation points that they do have. But I gotta say, as posable statues go, this is definitely one of the more sturdy and dynamic ones. I love the sculpting on the face. I love the paint job. I love the metallic green, man. That is really good. It's almost perfect, too. There's a couple spots where there's a few issues. Like, there's a tiny little speckle on his torso, on his ab muscle, where I don't know what happened, but like a little piece got chipped off. I might be able to hit that with a tiny little lick of paint. And then, like, there's a little bit of stuff like that where the paint is just kind of like a little blotchy. Because for the top of his boots, they just they didn't sculpt that part. They just painted it on. You know, it's fine. It looks good. It looks good. It's just that there's spots on the paint where it's a little rubbed, as you can see. Not terrible. You hardly notice it. I mean, if it's just standing posed, you know, you're not going to really notice it. It looks great. I love it. I love that. I really can't say enough about the metallic green. I think that was a great choice when they reintroduced Hal Jordan in Rebirth.
They upgraded all the Green Lantern costumes to give them that metallic green look, and I think that was an excellent choice. It translates really well to an action figure rather than like a flat green. I love it. It gives it that it makes it like sizzle and pop. Really great looking figure. Can't say enough good things about it. Worst thing you could say, like any DC Direct figure, the articulation, there could be more of it, but hey, you know, it's sturdy, it's well sculpted, it's posable to a degree. It just plain looks great, and you can move it around without worrying about breaking it, and that's about all you can ask for one of these kind of figures. Now, I have quite a few Hal Jordans. This one scales well with almost everything in the DC Direct line, so if you have no Hal Jordan figures, this would be a fantastic one to pick up. I would definitely recommend this one over some of the other ones that you'd find, even though this one is going to cost you a little bit more. There's no getting around it. But if you can get it, I definitely recommend it. It's a really great one, and it's not going to turn to dust like some of the early ones would. We'll talk about those in due time. We have a lot of DC Direct stuff to talk about, for sure. But for now, wanted to start us off with the Green Lantern everybody knows best, even though he's not technically my favorite, but he's up there for sure. He's got a great history from this 1960s through the Green Lantern Green Arrow run, and then the Parallax run in the 90s, and then you had his run as the Spectre for a while. That was pretty cool. But then everything comes back around full circle, and they finally brought Hal back into his most well-known role, and this figure totally represents that in a really awesome way. If this was the only Hal Jordan Green Lantern figure I had, I would still be thrilled with this Green Lantern figure. I'm glad that I have plenty of them, because one day I'm going to have this really awesome display with all the Hal Jordans like kind of lined up, and that's going to be really cool. But yeah, I'm glad I have more than one, but this one definitely one of my very favorites now. I would even put this one, not posability wise, but looks wise, I would put this one next to the Mattel one any day. I think it looks just as good on the shelf, even though you can't pose them as much. But yeah, definitely worth the money if you can find it. Good luck with that. I'm very happy to finally have it. A couple things, just side notes. So this particular line of figures didn't have a card back as much as they had this paper thing inside the clamshell package. And what's cool is you open it up and it shows you some of the other JLA Classified Classic action figures. Once again, all sculpted based on Ed McGuinness's artwork. You got Batgirl, you got Superman, you got the Flash, you got Batman, you got Aquaman, you got Superman Blue, you got Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. You got a nice little assortment there. Wonder Woman. You got, as you can see here, these artist-based figures really have a unique look to them. Very stylized. I would argue that the female figures in the line didn't really translate quite as well as the men did. Some of the women, kind of the eyes look a little weird, but, they never quite perfected that. But some of these others, I mean, you look at that Aquaman, you look at the sculpting in the beard and the hair on that, that's amazing. Kyle Rayner looks perfect. We're going to talk about him soon enough. And the Superman and the Batman, those figures were repainted and re-released a couple different times by DC Direct, but those figures, those sculpts look great in any paint job and in any of the releases. Definitely worth tracking down. Two of the best looking Superman and Batman figures that DC Direct ever put out. Really great. So yeah, I just wanted to show that off really quick. I keep stuff like this, so I didn't know that was in there. I'm glad I opened it. This is why you should open your toys, instead of keeping them locked up in plastic. They're suffocating. Anyway, so that's what we got here. Definitely pick this guy up if you can find it. This has been in-depth look at the most well-known, perhaps most popular, not my favorite, but many people's favorite Green Lantern of all time, the one and only Hal Jordan. We are going to be back soon enough to talk about more Green Lantern, more DC Direct on From the Vault, but that's about all we can say for this one right here. I know I'm happy with this guy. Hopefully, you guys are able to add one of these to your collection soon enough. Check eBay, check around online, but you're going to spend money on that guy for sure. But that's the name of the game, you know? How bad do you want it? How bad do you want it? That's the name of the game. Well, until next time, this has been Rikki Roxx from the Vault Retro Action Figure Review. We got a lot more to talk about, so stick around, like, share, subscribe, comment. You guys don't have a lot to say for whatever reason. You guys can comment on the videos as far as I know. You don't for whatever reason. I know I have a lot to say, obviously. I want to hear what you guys have to say, and wouldn't mind hearing what you guys would like to hear me cover in the future. More of these, more Mattels, maybe some older Kenner stuff. I mean, we'll get there, but what are you guys most interested in? That's what I like to know. I'm going to do what I want anyway. I just like to know what you guys think. Anyway, till next time. From the Vault, Rikki Roxx Retro Action Figure Review, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. We're going to be back next time with more DC Direct. Till then, if you can't be good, be bad. And remember, open your friggin' toys. They're suffocating.